we're seeing a radical collapse of Christian culture in the world today.
Humanity is losing its bearings, its direction, because it's walking in the dark.
A lot of people aren't seeking God sincerely. God wants to give a gift to the human race through Jesus.
In Him there is no darkness. In God alone is light. In God alone is life.
He wants to live His life in you and through you and extend it to the whole world.
To be Christian means to live by the Spirit, to walk by the Spirit.
That's what Christianity is all about, is saving people.
Jesus is inside knocking on the door and He wants to come out.
He's alive. He continues to save.
The kingdom of God is at hand because the King is on the throne.
Welcome to The Choices We Face. I'm Peter Herbeck, and it's my great delight to be able to introduce to you our special guest, a man who I consider a hero, a warrior on the front lines for the church and for justice. His name is Richard Thompson, who's the founder and director of the Thomas More Law Center. That's located here in Ann Arbor. Richard has been with us before, and there's so much in play right now in our country in the battle for religious freedom. And in this area, Richard's been fighting in various ways for many years. So it's really a privilege to have him here with us. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you for those kind comments.
No, it's really true. I see you, I have tremendous admiration for you, and I really see you as a warrior right now for us. And your experience as the prosecutor in Oakland County, and I told you beforehand, if I could just read your bio, it would take the whole program, all the things that you've accomplished and all the battles that you've been in over the years. And certainly we're in some significant battles right now. But before we get into that, Richard, would you tell us a little bit more about the work of the Thomas More Law Center and what you've had your hands in, the mission?
Okay, the mission of the Thomas More Law Center, first of all, we're a nonprofit public interest law firm. We, as you say, based in Ann Arbor, Michigan, but we're national in scope. We defend and promote America's Christian heritage and moral values and a strong national defense of sovereign and independent United States of America. And we do this in the courts. And the reason why we do this in the courts is because if you look at the history of our nation for the last half century, most of the moral decisions in the direction of our country has been dictated by the Supreme Court, which makes the final decision, and no one can appeal that. If you look at the ACLU and how they have already changed the culture, back in the 1960s, they started with outlawing prayers in public schools, and they outlawed the reading of the Bible in public schools. They outlawed prayers at graduations. Then they went after nativity scenes and said you could not have nativity scenes on public property. Then the Ten Commandments, then crosses. Then they got involved with challenging traditional marriage. They got the Supreme Court to say that it is a constitutional right of homosexuals to engage in homosexual activity, and the state could not do anything. Up until that time, there were laws against homosexual behavior. And so if you look at what's happened to our country, even though we have three branches of government, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial, ultimately because the Supreme Court makes the final decision, they are the final determiners. And for a long time, people of faith did not have any representation in the courts. And that's why the Thomas More Law Center got involved in over a decade ago. And we're fighting these battles. We consider ourselves a sword and shield of people of faith. The anecdote to the ACLU, as Bill O'Reilly has said before, and we've gotten involved in cases. We defended the Mount Soledad Cross, which was a cross in San Diego, California, that was the centerpiece of a veterans memorial. And all at once, they decided that cross was endorsing religion in some way as a violation of the Establishment Clause. And so there was a 17-year battle to take that cross down. The city of San Diego decided they had enough and they were going to take it down. A fighter pilot, a Korean fighter pilot, contacted the Thomas More Law Center and said, well, can you do something about it? We got involved. And so ultimately, because of our involvement, we were able to save the cross. Then what happened was the cross was turned over to the federal government as a national memorial. Up until that time, it was a state, city memorial. The federal government got involved, and the ACLU filed another lawsuit. And that lawsuit is still pending.
Wow.
They've attacked the cross on Sunrise Rock in the Mojave Desert. Right now, we're representing the city of Frankenmuth, Michigan, that's had a cross up since 1976. It was put up during our nation's bicentennial. It's a 55-foot steel cross that is on public land, and basically the purpose of that was to memorialize what our founders did when they came into this country, based on their religious beliefs and the sacrifices they made to further this country and establish this as a nation under God. And because that cross is on public land, now we have another battle going on. This time, Americans United for Separation of Church and State wrote a letter, said, take down the cross or we'll file a lawsuit. They asked the Thomas More Law Center to get involved.
Oh, fantastic. We're so glad
you
guys
go
are on the front line.
nativity scenes. We've defended nativity scenes recently. So there is this battle that's going on with organizations like the ACLU and other like organizations to eliminate every indicia of Christianity from the public square they can, because they are militantly atheist, and they want to turn this country into an atheist nation.
And they're redefining the meaning of separation of church and state. And what's really the traditional and the real understanding? What does it mean, separation of church and state?
Well, you go back to the First Amendment of the Constitution. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. What that meant was Congress, the federal government. It didn't have anything to do with states, schools, municipalities. And our founding fathers, at that time, there were several colonies and states that had an established religion. In other words, you were supporting a religion. And what they wanted to do was make sure that there was not be a national government that would come down and have a national religion. Now, if you look at the language of the First Amendment, and there's a couple of Supreme Court justices that say, let's go back to the actual language. And what that meant was that the federal government, Congress, cannot establish a religion. And what establishment meant at that time was coerce. So if you look at it, the federal government cannot coerce someone to become a Christian, a non-Christian, an atheist, or any other religion. If you don't like a cross, you can turn your head and walk away. But now, if someone is offended by the mere seeing a cross or the mere seeing a nativity scene, they go ahead and file a lawsuit. And that's the concern we have. We have to get back to the founding principles and what was the intent, the original intent of the First Amendment.
Here's one of the, I think, the biggest problems. Maybe you could expand on this a little bit, that it seems that many law schools are cranking out lawyers who become judges who don't think in terms of original intent. And they almost see themselves as legislating from the bench, or they see themselves as having part of their whole job now is to either reinterpret the whole document and for our times.
Well, here's you're absolutely right. And they started off with this concept that the Constitution is a living document, so we can put into it anything we want depending on what the consensus of the public was. That wasn't the intent of the Constitution. If that's the intent of the Constitution, it's a piece of paper that has no meaning at all. You can put whatever meaning you want.
Every generation has its own opinion. Rewrite your own Constitution, basically.
And it was supposed to be a contract, that there's a way that the Constitution can be amended, and it provides for, the states doing it and the people that can do it as well, but not the judges. The judges don't have this roving commission to change the Constitution the way they want to. And that's what they've done. And basically, instead of interpreting the law, they are now making the law based upon their personal ideology. And that's the concern that many people have. The schools, the law schools, don't really teach you constitutional law anymore. They just teach you public policy and the way you want to change it. And the sad part of that is that an organization like the Thomas More Law Center, when we file a lawsuit, once you find the ACLU coming in there, and they have all these law school professors that help them out free. These law school professors use law students to help them out. So the taxpayers ultimately are paying thousands and thousands of dollars to support these professors and their students to really destroy the meaning of a constitution.
And so I'm thinking now, as you're talking about the California fight for the same-sex marriage issue in Proposition 8, I think it was called, where the people of California voted, to basically maintain the traditional definition of marriage, and a district court judge who himself you didn't find out till later, was an active homosexual and had a total investment in this whole thing. And his wife's involved in the ACLU, and she's totally involved in it. And he does just unprecedented things, and he completely ignores the will of the entire, all the voters of the state of California.
Right. So what you have now is tyranny by the judicial branch of government.
Yeah.
Because they decide what the people, whether that vote is going to stand or not. And so you've lost a representative government when you do that. And so there's a balance in the old days, in previous decades. The courts realized that they were there to merely interpret the law, not make the law.
Yeah.
And they were very reluctant to get involved in cases that dealt with, political questions. But nowadays, they jump in right away. They're the ones that started the homosexual movement in the military. Yeah. They're the ones that, who decided that abortion is a constitutional right. For 200 years, it was never decided to be a constitutional right. Our founding fathers didn't talk about abortion, and yet out of thin air, the judges in 1973 decided, oh, hey, there is a constitutional right to abortion. And now we're, I don't know what the latest toll is, 55, 60 million unborn children have been killed because of a decision by a Supreme Court that made up a law. These justices who are not elected, who hold lifetime appointments, and they made it based upon the ideology and not the meaning of the Constitution.
It makes me think about Nietzsche's line about will to power. I mean, it's really what they're exercising power according to their own will, not according to some kind of standard. Now, Richard, we're going to take just a little break, and just for a few seconds. When we come back, I'd like to talk a little bit about the specific attacks that seem to be coming on the church in our day against religious freedom, like the HHS mandate, some of these things that are just unprecedented in our history.
Yes.
Okay?
Sure.
We'll be back in just a minute.
Small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Welcome back to The Choices We Face. I'm Peter Herbeck. We're here with Richard Thompson, Dick Thompson, who is the President and Chief Counsel for the Thomas More Law Center. We've been having a fascinating discussion, I think a very important discussion, about some very important things that are unfolding in our country right now. And one of the things that's happening is the battle with the HHS mandate. And I want to ask you about it, but before I do, I think of the words of Cardinal George, from Chicago. He's one of the most brilliant clergymen in America. He's a holy man. He's a man careful with his words. And he said, in this battle right now for religious freedom, we're experiencing something monumental. He said, something monumental is happening in our country. He said, something I never dreamt, or any of us ever dreamt would happen. And then he said something even more dramatic. He said it was his belief and his conviction that he would die in his bed, that his successor would die in prison, and his successor would die a martyr in the public square. So you're hearing some very dramatic things from people who are very careful about how they talk. And so help us understand what's at stake and what's going on here.
That's a great quote that you just gave, because I think that really puts what's happening in a great perspective. And then there's Cardinal Raymond Burke, who basically said it's a war. Americans, I should say Catholics, are going to be persecuted and put in jail just for what they believe. And what we saw for the first time with Obamacare and the HHS mandate is that the federal government declared war on a particular religion. They knew very well, because of the reports that we have, that contraception, abortifacients, and sterilization were opposed by the Catholic Church. And they didn't care, because they thought, well, the women will be on our side. And they passed this regulation that basically attacks fundamental principles of the Catholic Church. So Catholics today have a choice. They can obey the law and violate their faith, or they can disobey the law, become sort of criminals, and support their faith. That is the choice that Catholics have today. And that's why there are so many lawsuits, and the Thomas More Law Center has been involved in a couple of these lawsuits to challenge the constitutionality of the HHS mandate. Because if you look at what the Founding Fathers said when they were developing the Constitution, it was the right of conscience was the most sacred principle that they were supporting. And so throughout the years, religious freedom has been very important, even when that religious freedom meant that a particular religion was fighting against the majority will. And we have a case where it's Yoder versus Wisconsin, a case where a group, and I'm trying to think of the Amish, Amish, didn't want their kids to go to a high school. After 16, they were supposed to work on the farm. The Amish were penalized $5 because they kept their children from the public school system. And that case went all the way up to the Supreme Court.
Wow.
And the Supreme Court said you cannot force a religion to violate a cardinal principle. And that only meant $5.
Yeah.
Okay.
And because it's a matter of conscience, right? It's really a matter of conscience. And so today, a lot of times when people hear of faith, they just think automatically, well, that's just subjective opinion. And why should their subjective opinions matter? We're talking about in conscience, people believe they're standing before God Almighty.
Yes.
And that there's a great deal at stake in all of this stuff.
Our founding fathers were very religious, and they were Christian. Basically, most of them were Christian. And basically, they believed they were establishing a government based upon Christian principles. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, which is our birth certificate, all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That means rights you cannot take away, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When they talked about the Creator, who were they talking about? It was a Judeo-Christian God, a God that basically formed man in his own image, that gave him these rights. And what the government and what a lot of secularists are trying to do today is to say that your rights don't come from God, your rights come from government, and we get to decide what your rights are. And that is the battle that is going on right now with the HHS mandate. And that is why it's so important for us to win this battle, because if we lose this battle, then all bets are off as far as religious liberty goes, because at that point the government will decide whether you're going to be able to.
They're the arbiter at that point.
They become the arbiter.
The dispenser.
Right.
They're the dispenser of what we call rights, and the government exists to recognize in part those rights that precede the government. Right? Because they come, as you're saying, directly from God, and nature's God. That's where they come from.
A government is supposed to assist people in recognizing those rights, not become an enemy of those rights. And that's what's happening today. And if we do not win this battle, I believe that America will disintegrate, because our religious.
Why so dramatic?
Well, because if you look at our founding father, the father of our country, George Washington, he said, of the indispensable supports of our government is religion and morality. That's what he said in his farewell address. And if we remove religion and morality as the founding principles at the foundation of our government, then we may still exist, but it won't be the same kind of government, and we'll ultimately disintegrate because there's nothing that holds us together. You cannot have
what we have been.
You cannot be a balkanized country. There has to be some foundation principles that everyone believes. And one of those foundational principles, regardless, this might not be politically correct, is Christianity. We have to understand that this is a Christian nation. And until the 1930s and even beyond, the Supreme Court's justices would say in opinions, this is a Christian nation. Patrick Henry, one of the founding colonists, one of the patriots, said this country was founded on not just religion, but the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
that's what he said,
Yeah.
okay? And if you go back to all of the statements that our founding fathers made, there was no question about that they were creating a Christian nation.
Yeah.
Starting with the Declaration of Independence and the comments they made afterwards. So I think it's a battle that is really not only a battle for the existence of the church as we know it in America, but it's a battle for the existence of America itself.
Yeah, what we've known, what we've had is going to disappear. Something else will remain in its place. And there's people who consciously want to replace what's there. I mean, they're aggressively pursuing it and using the armor lock because they want a different America completely. And they actually want to cut themselves off, the new America, from what they consider the shackles of that Judeo-Christian worldview. Now, the founding fathers and presently the church is not trying to say everybody needs to be Christian. Everybody needs to become Christian. They're just saying, look, this country was put together by people who grasp that there is a God, that God exists, that he's revealed himself, and he's made us in a particular way, and we need to respect that reality in our laws and in our way of life, because if it doesn't, this can't work. And so one of the founding fathers, a number of them said, democracy can only work for virtuous people, and virtue comes from morality, having the right morals, which is rooted in the religious belief and perspective that we receive. That's why the 10 Commandments are on the Supreme Court and all these other things, because they were respecting reality. Right?
Absolutely. And I agree with you. Everyone doesn't have to be Christian, but you have to understand that the foundations of our nation is a Judeo-Christian foundation.
Yeah.
We have traditional marriage. Now, if they can separate the Judeo-Christian principles from the value system that we have, that's where you can get same-sex marriage. If you have same-sex marriage, ultimately the family is going to break down. I don't care what they say.
Yeah.
The family is going to break down.
It gets trivial, yeah.
And the kids are going to suffer. If you look at what the Catholic Church has said about that, when you allow children to become adopted by same-sex marriage, it is actually doing violence to those children.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Those who support the idea in academia of same-sex marriage, and in the media have pushed to say it's settled science that there's no difference between heterosexual biological parents and family and all these other kinds of forms. And that recently, a study was done by Mark Regners from the University of Texas, and it was like a nuclear bomb then, when it was the largest study ever done. And what it did was reveal very clearly that it's very different. And what he found, the outcomes and the data, was very disturbing, the differences. And the healthiest, safest, best place to raise children is in an intact heterosexual family. The traditional family is the best place for them, period.
Peter,
not the only, but it's
the natural law, right?
Yeah,
it's the natural law. And I think that's what we have to keep on going back to the natural.
And we're not bashing families who can't have children, are not able to have their own children, or single parents that are slogging and fighting. But we have to hold up the ideal, all of us, and continue to support it and follow what the ideal of what nature itself has brought together for us, and every society that's ever existed has recognized. Right?
And the church's position on this is really a great position. It is that, we're not saying homosexuals are themselves as persons are bad. We're saying the act is bad. And you love the sinner, but you hate the sin. I think that's a way of putting it. So we have all of these battles right now. And if you look at what happened to the Roman Empire and the decline of the Roman Empire, you can see the same thing happening in the United States. I
read an article not long ago. A very prominent gay activist said, we're going to use sex and sexuality. We're going to push the parameters of sex and sexuality so far that we're going to be able to transform both the idea of marriage, but the entire culture itself we're going to change. And so there's a conniving that's going on with the law, with judges, with political leaders who are selling out for that whole thing. And that's really the driving force and why the church keeps standing up to say, wait a minute, this is going to have disastrous effects.
And what we see also is what's happening in our public school system, where it's become an indoctrination center. It's not teaching our children, reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's teaching them homosexuality is just as good as heterosexuality.
We're going to take a little break, Richard, and share with our friends a new booklet that Ralph wrote that's yours, free for the asking, called New Evangelization, Why Bother? We'll be back in just a minute.
There's a lot of talk in the church today about the new evangelization. What exactly is it? And what does it have to do with the ordinary Catholic? Even more fundamentally, why bother? Does it really make any difference if people believe in Christ or not? Does it really make any difference if people become joined to the church or not? Isn't almost everybody going to be saved even if they don't know Christ or the church? In this booklet, I answer these and other questions about this all-important topic. Because of the generosity of our donors, we'd like to make this booklet available to you at no cost, just for the asking. Go to our website at renewalministries.net and click on Free Booklet, or call 1-800-282-4789. You'll really find some answers that are relevant to you.
Well, welcome back to The Choices We Face. We're here with Richard Thompson from the Thomas More Law Center. We had a very, I think, important conversation, and we just have a couple of minutes left. Richard, what would you say to people? What difference can one person make? What should people do to try to get in the game, roll up their sleeves, get some skin in the game, and stand with the church right now? And
yes, it's very important. You know, I always go back to a comment that was made by Pope Leo XIII. He said, Christians are born for combat. We have to understand that. We are born for combat. So it is important to understand the Catholic faith and to believe in the Catholic faith, but that doesn't end. Then you have to take action on the Catholic faith. And that's where I think the Thomas More Law Center is involved. And we are more of the action-oriented part of the ministry. Yeah. And so they should get involved in supporting the right candidates. Mm-hmm. This is going to be an important time. Mm-hmm. They should be involved in supporting organizations like yourself that evangelizes. And then they should be interested in supporting the Thomas More Law Center, which is involved in court cases all across the country, not just in the Ann Arbor area, but we're a national organization. From Florida to New York to California, we're involved in these cases, supporting the right of Christians to freely exercise their religion, supporting traditional values, supporting the fundamental principles for national security. Yeah. So Christians should be involved. The Constitution is a nicely worded document, but it's only that unless you take action to enforce it.
Thank you so much for the exhortation. Thanks for being on the front lines. Thank you for being with us, Richard.
And thank you for all you're doing too.
Yeah,
Peter.
This is such an important time, friends. This is truly a monumental moment in the history of our country. It's time for us to pray. It's time for us to educate ourselves. It's time to follow our bishops and the leaders of the church who are pointing and not take our message from the world, not take our note from the world that's aggressively trying to convince you and to convince me to make a break from this traditional Christian, Judeo-Christian worldview we've been given, that our forefathers have passed on to us. This is an important time. It's a time of prayer and a time of action. And I pray that you, each one of you, will be able to roll up your sleeves and get into the fray. God bless you. We'll see you next week.